Buenas noches otra vez. Este año hemos querido hacer algo diferente y hemos invitado desde Inglaterra a un amigo, Peter Field, quien es uno de los profesionales más reconocidos mundialmente en el estudio de la efectividad de medios masivos y digitales. Presentará por primera vez en América Latina y acá en Lima, Perú, las conclusiones de su último estudio, Media in Focus, Marketing Effectiveness in the Digital Era. El estudio se basa en hechos sobre 500 casos recopilados de grandes anunciantes durante el año 2013 al 2016 e inclusive el 2017. Este estudio fue realizado en asociación con Google, ThinkBox y el IPA, que es el Institute of Practitioners in Advertising de Inglaterra. I would like to introduce to you Mr. Peter Field, our friend. Today, he will share with us all his experience and all his findings in all the books and papers he wrote, demonstrating the still powerful effectiveness of television. Thank you, Peter, for being with us, and welcome.
Eric, thank you very much. That's a very kind introduction.
This is your house.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So we hear a lot these days about fake news. And I'm going to be arguing over the next 45 minutes or so that there is an enormous amount of fake news when it comes to advertising effectiveness. Particularly over the last 10 years, it has led to some big changes in marketing practice and advertising practice. And that many of those changes have actually been destroying value, killing effectiveness. They're not good. So I'm going to talk about a number of those. I'm going to focus in on where I think the real damage is happening. But I'm aware that a lot of the data I'm going to be using comes from countries, not just the UK, but other countries where there are very, very big digital advertising marketplaces. And you may feel this doesn't yet apply to Peru. But I'm going to offer this to you as a warning. Do not make the mistakes that are being made around the world. In the UK, paid search already takes more money than TV. If you add other digital tools like social, and the digital advertising take is almost twice what is spent on TV. This is crazy. I'm going to argue this is crazy. The reasons behind it are really important, and I urge you not to make this mistake yourselves in Peru as the digital sales machine gets going. A little word about the research. As Eric has already told you, this is the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising data I am using. This is the confidential data that is submitted alongside case studies that are submitted to the Effectiveness Awards competition, which is run every 2 years in the UK. So very simply, what it enables us to do is to examine how inputs, in the sense of advertising strategy and media choices, influence outcomes in the sense of business effectiveness. It's a very simple piece of analysis in many ways. I'm going to be using it to answer the question, what is really changing in the digital era and what is not really changing? Let's sort out the real news from the fake news. Okay? I'm going to be very much talking using about 500 case studies that have been submitted in the digital era. Sometimes I will be digging down into about 120 case studies submitted just in the last 4 years or so to get a snapshot of right now and what's going on. A lot of people at this point in my presentation say to me, yeah, okay, Peter, but you're British. You're all crazy in Britain. Why should this matter to us? And of course, you're right. We are all crazy in Britain. We're mad. We're mad. But I'll just make 2 points about that. First of all, this is not all British data. If you look at the kinds of brands that are in this database, they are increasingly global brands. We live in a global marketing world. So although some of the analyses may take place in the UK, the brands are typically global brands. But also this has been a competition open to the effectiveness authors of the world now for many years. And only, in fact, around about a third of the case studies in this database are UK only. About a quarter of them never even ran in the UK. So you will find case studies from the US, from China, from Brazil, from India, from all over Europe. It's increasingly a global database, though I can't pretend to you that it is a balanced global database. It's very skewed towards Europe. So it is very skewed towards those markets that have very developed digital advertising marketplaces, and you will see that played out in this particular analysis. So I'm going to just focus on three particular truths that I think we have forgotten in the last 10 years or so, and I think that are really affecting advertising effectiveness at the moment. So the first of those is that we cannot generalize about effectiveness. Effectiveness in the short term is fundamentally different from effectiveness in the long term. We have to understand that, and if we don't, we will make some big mistakes. My co-author and I, Les Binet, argued back in 2013 when we last published on this that smart businesses, the most successful businesses, develop campaigns that both drive long-term growth as well as activate short-term sales. Different strands, different media choices, different messages. And they do that in balance. And we found that the sweet spot in effectiveness terms is when we spend about 60% of our budget on long-term and about 40% on the short-term. It varies a bit. I will talk more about that. That's an average. If we forget that, effectiveness really suffers, and of course that's part of what's going on. The second thing we have forgotten in the digital information age is that people do not make informed decisions about all of their purchasing. We don't have the time, we don't have the energy. Emotions affect the decisions that we make much, much more powerfully. So emotional campaigns and the media that can deliver the most emotional campaigns are the ones that tend to drive long-term effectiveness. I'll talk about that too. And then finally, ever since particularly the launch of social media and Facebook, we have been told that the smart money is in tight targeting, that mass marketing is old-fashioned and is not the best way to spend our money. I'm going to fundamentally challenge that. That is complete rubbish. We'll look at some of the evidence for that. It's essential for long-term growth. So those are my three important truths. So let's start with the first one, which is that short and long-term effectiveness are fundamentally different. Okay, so let me just explain the problem here in this simple chart. It's not a very pretty chart, but it's quite powerful in some ways. What we have forgotten in recent years is that there are two ways that we drive growth over time for our brands. The way that we have begun to forget in many markets around the world, wherever I travel, this is what people are forgetting, that the most powerful way to drive long-term growth is through what I'm going to call brand building. Now that is to say the creation of powerful associations with our brands, and when they are powerful, they are almost always emotional associations with our brands that prime consumers to want to choose that brand way ahead of purchase. They don't even know they're going to buy it yet. Those of you who have read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he won the Nobel Prize for it, so it must be true, will know that he talks about System 1 and System 2. So System 1 is how we use our feelings to make decisions. He talks about heuristics, those mental shortcuts that we use to make the thousands of decisions we have to make every year and make them easily. And they're driven by our feelings, what feels right, not what we think is right. That is what brand building does. It creates these heuristics that prime us to make these decisions. Now, the steps, the growth steps, don't tend to be particularly large in this kind of model. But the strength of brand building is that the decay rates are very slow. These emotional associations endure for years and sometimes decades if we've built them. So over time, we get a cumulative build, we get a cumulative growth in sales for our brand. And if you like, next year's sales targets get easier to achieve than this year's were. That is the great strength of brand building that we are ignoring and walking away from. And we are ignoring and walking away from it because in recent years, all the excitement and all the money has been around what I will call the sales activation model of thinking. So these are behavioral prompts. They could be a deal or an offer, a price promotion. They could be a seasonal prompt, Christmas is coming. Or they could just be some little piece of new product news that makes us, that nudges us to buy the brand again. But they're behavioral prompts. They are pieces of information, facts. To use Daniel Kahneman's construct, they are system 2 messages. They require us to think, and so we will only think about them if they are particularly important and interesting. Many will be ignored, filtered out. But the ones that are good, the strong ones, will provoke some really quite sharp, short-term effects on sales. No doubt about it. A great promotion will drive a big spike in sales. But here's the problem. Either because they are time-limited or simply because we do not remember facts, information, in the same way that these emotional associations endure for years, they decay very, very rapidly. So you can see it plateaus, this approach. And in fact, in many instances, it starts to decline. But let's be positive for a moment and say it plateaus. So you can see on this chart the essential problem we have here. If you measure success in the long term, that is to say the right-hand side of my chart, you will correctly come to the conclusion that brand building is the most powerful way of driving growth. But if you measure success over the short term, that is to say the left-hand side of my chart, you will also correctly come to precisely the opposite conclusion. That actually it is these sales activation messages, these behavioral prompts, that are the most powerful way of driving growth. And here's where it gets really bad news, which is that the cusp point, the point at which brand building starts to take over as the dominant driver of growth, is around about 6 months into the life of a campaign, assuming it ever got to run that long, which often they don't now. Now, if you think about it, that's a really unfortunate period of time, because it means everything up to and including quarterly reporting, but particularly the newfound obsession with real-time marketing and retargeted advertising messages puts us absolutely in the short-term world. If we are judged and measure success by the quarter, we will never do the brand building thing. We'll never bother. Because what drives success most powerfully is sales activation. And this is happening on an industrial scale worldwide. Advertisers are abandoning brand building because they just want a good quarter. It's immensely destructive. Why do I say it's growing on an industrial scale? Well, here's some evidence from it. These are the case studies in this database. We have almost 40 years of data here. I've spared you the first, 25 years. It would stretch off over there. It was dead flat. For most of this database, about 7 or 8% of case studies were short-term. That is to say, designed to run and measured over periods of less than 6 months. That's how I define short-term. And then the advent of the global financial crisis in 07-08 has caused an explosion of short-termism, and it's been fed by the digital sales machine that has taken advantage of that. So it's gone from 7 or 8% up to more than 25% in that period of time, and that's 10-year aggregated data, so it's actually much higher than that in the more recent time frame. Now this is bad because what it is leading to is an obsession on short-term effects. So these are what I call activation effects. These are these short-term, immediate responses to our advertising. It could be something we do online, or it could be a direct sale, but it's a short-term response, something we do right now after seeing the message. This is the only business metric, I promise you, the only business metric that has grown over this period of time. Most of the other business, all of the other business metrics have actually been declining. I'll come back to that in a minute. But here's the worrying thing. If you look at what's happening to brand metrics, and I could show you any number of these, we have about 8 or 9 different brand metrics in our database. Most of them have been declining at an alarming rate. Brand awareness is the one that's probably relevant to every brand on the planet. It's not the most alarming one, but let's just look at what's happening to that. So you can see the problem there. We are allowing our brands to weaken. We are withdrawing investment behind brand building, which is about long-term growth, in order to feed this obsession with short-term effects. It is hugely dangerous. I urge you not to make this mistake. We've done the experiment. We have got hurt. There's no reason you guys should. Let me just show you what's been happening to effectiveness levels. Now again, this is 10-year aggregated data, so it gives the impression that peak effectiveness was actually reached later than it really was. Peak effectiveness was reached around about 2008, and we'd seen a long-term growth in effectiveness, typically. Since the turn of the millennium, we'd seen some very, very big improvements to the typical levels of effectiveness that we recorded. And this is a basket of metrics, business metrics, 7 or 8 in there. We just, each year it got better and better. We patted ourselves on the back and said, hell, we're good. And then this happened. And this is fundamentally fueled by short-termism. We have thrown away all the benefits of the early part of the millennium as we learned more about how to get better results from our campaigns, how to use long-term and short-term together, how to use traditional media and new digital media to get better effect. We've thrown it all away. It could not be more crazy. Now, I'll just give you some examples of this. I've talked in theory so far. We've used numbers. Let me give you a practical example of the typical kind of short-term campaign that is emerging now. You don't need me to tell you what a promotional campaign looks like, but it's a much bigger problem than that. So this is a typical campaign that I read case studies of dozens of these. It's a social media pure play. Now, I spend a lot of time reading social media case studies from around the world, looking for examples of great effectiveness. For the most part, it is a long and lonely search. I don't find many. This is one of the best ones. It's from the UK. It's for a snack brand. And they were targeting the online gaming community, which is a big community. And the idea was this. You know, you're online gaming, you're locked in mortal combat with some guy from Korea who you're trying to kill. And it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You're still playing. You're hungry. What are you going to do? You can't stop playing. You'll lose points. You'll lose the game. You might lose money. So they had this idea. Let's crowdsource through Facebook ideas for a hands-free device that at the touch of a keystroke would dispense a pellet of this snack food into your mouth. It's that depressing. Doesn't get any worse. I always say, if that's the future of mankind, I'm checking into that Swiss clinic tomorrow. Anyway, but of course it was a lovely idea. Let's not poke fun. It was a very big success. 120 million paid Facebook impressions, and it paid for itself. Every pound they spent on this campaign generated net of costs £2 of incremental profit. A respectable return on investment. What could possibly be wrong with that? Well, look at this econometrically modeled sales decomposition chart. 6 weeks after the end of that campaign, there was no measurable sales uplift. Because nobody had thought about keeping this in market long enough to embed behavioral change. So at the end of the campaign, everyone just went back to their old snacking behaviors. They hadn't thought about the long term. And this is typical of what's happening. Contrast that, if you will, with this campaign, which when the case study was written in 2014, was the longest running success story in the entire data bank. There is a 20-year timeline to the phenomenal success of this campaign. It's the definitive long-term success story. The sales growth due to the campaign are the red bars, the red element of this. And again, this is based on an econometric model. That adds up to over £1 billion, over £1 billion of incremental profit over a 20-year period. It's an astonishing success story. And I would argue that it is inconceivable that you could have driven that through a series of short-term activations. Only brand building can do that. And particularly only TV-driven brand building tends to achieve it. I'll show you one of many ads that they ran over that 20 years. This is one of the ones that was running 3 years ago. It's still running now. It's very popular in the UK. It's a simple brand leader ad. It's for Specsavers are opticians. They test people's eyes and make glasses. And their simple claim is that if you don't get your eyes tested at Specsavers, the world is going to be a very confusing and blurry place. So here is one of their many ads. Okay, so there is an activation message, and TV is very good at activation, as I will argue. But this is a brand-building campaign. It's emotional, we remember it, and we talk about it. A fantastic success story. Now, we argued back in 2013, my colleague Les Binet and I, that you need to be doing this to drive long-term growth. These kinds of campaigns are vital. But you do also need to do the short-term sales activation piece as well. But you need to do it in balance, the 60-40 rule I talked about. A lot of people have said, yes, but that's not true anymore, so let's just revalidate it with the very latest data. I'm going to use 4 metrics to prove to you that we still need to do this in balance, and 60-40 is a good start point. So if you look at the case studies that achieved the biggest impact on market share growth, this is how they divided their budget. 60% on long-term brand building and about 40% on short-term activation, give or take a few percentage points. 3 other metrics, the most efficient case studies, the most profitable case studies, and those that had the biggest impact on the strength of the brand, they all spent about 60% of their budget on brand building and about 40% on sales activation. It seems to be a consistent and durable rule. It does vary slightly from some categories to other, depending on the nature of the category, but 60-40 is a good start point. Say people, yes, but that can't be true of digital brands. Surely digital brands don't need brand building. Google never spent any money on brand building. Come back to that in a minute. So let's look at digital brands and compare them with non-digital brands. And it turns out they're basically the same. There's no significant difference between these two groups. The optimum budget split for offline brands is virtually the same as online brands. The online marketplace is a very competitive one, and we need these emotional System 1 priming campaigns to help us navigate the enormous world of choice that is there with online brands. Otherwise, we'll never choose the brand. We'll get sucked into price, so on. So it is really true of online brands. Do not be deceived when people say Google never did it. It's more important in those campaigns, those case studies, those categories, where people do a lot of online research. It turns out we need to spend even more on brand building because we have to create those heuristics that will prime people to choose. Otherwise, it's just going to go on price. It'll just be a commodity market. Okay, so all of that is very important, but again, let's just come back to this issue, because I hear this time and time again. What about Google? What about Uber? What about Amazon? Well, this is what these guys are doing. Here are some of the biggest online brands, tech brands, and this is not just a UK phenomenon. This is their UK expenditure on broadcast media. Most of this is TV. This is a global phenomenon. Everywhere in the world, these brands are spending millions on brand building, TV. It's a case of do as I say, not as I do. They're spending more than £100 million in the last year on TV. They are now the biggest TV advertising sector in the UK. Now, if that isn't hypocrisy, I don't know what is, because these are the companies who are telling us we shouldn't be spending our money on TV, and yet they spend their own on it. Now, that tells you all you need to know, believe me. Be very careful about the digital sales machine. Let me give you another example, time for another commercial break, of a lovely example of a brand that fought back in a digital marketplace. Direct Line is an insurance company. They pioneered direct sell insurance in the UK back when it was done on the telephone and by paper. But they found themselves disintermediated from consumers by price comparison websites, who essentially tried to make the decision for consumers. So it just becomes a commodity price market. And these guys knew they had to fight back against this, otherwise they're dead. Brands are dead in this category unless we defend them, unless we fight for them. That's what these guys did. They decided that they were going to strengthen the brand, get back on TV in particular, and give people reasons to come direct to Direct Line and not just use price comparison websites. So they reintroduced Harvey Keitel in his role as Winston Wolfe from Pulp Fiction, the ultimate fixer. It's a lovely creative idea, and he is now their spokesman. He is the fixer that fixes your problems as a customer. So it is an analogy for what this brand will do. Here is one of their early ads.
Winston Wolfe, I'm here to help.
Now, Harvey Keitel loves this campaign. He's made an enormous amount of input to it, I'm told, and it's been a phenomenal success story. Here's the evidence. So they turned a negative trend, losing out to the digital marketplace, into a very, very positive trend. It's been an astonishing success story. So you can fight back, even in a digital marketplace like this, if you're prepared to commit to brand building, and in particular, if you commit to TV, because no other medium has the power to break through that kind of indifference in the way that TV does. Okay, let's move on to my second big truth, which is the power of emotion. We've already begun to see some of that in the campaigns that I've shown you. So let's be quite clear about this. The internet has not changed the way we make most of our decisions in life. We still use emotional heuristics. So here's a piece of evidence. If you compare emotional campaigns, those campaigns that tried to change the way we feel about brands, with rational campaigns, those that tried to change the way we think about brands, you can see that it is the emotional campaigns that are the ones that really build stronger brands. They are about twice as powerful at building strong brands. This is the number of effects we have across a basket of brand metrics, and they are about twice as likely to make major changes in that. That is the power of System 1. That is the power of emotional heuristics. They make us, prime us to choose our brand. Okay? they're also more efficient. We don't only benefit from this priming effect, but the great thing about emotions, as I argued earlier, is we remember them forever. They endure. So they become extremely efficient tools for selling. So we're going to compare this efficiency metric, and my efficiency metric is very simple. It is how much market share growth do we drive per annum for every unit of investment we put behind those campaigns. So we're going to compare 3 different campaigns. Let's start with rational and emotional, because that's what we've done before. And if you do that, it's a no-brainer. Emotional campaigns are around about 5 times as efficient as rational campaigns. They just work really powerfully. But we can go better than that. So emotional campaigns change the way we feel about brands. But if we can do that to the extent that we make people want to share their enthusiasm, word of mouth, sharing our ads, talking about our ads, this is what these fame campaigns do. We can get an even better level of efficiency. Hugely important. These are the A-team of effectiveness. These are the most powerful advertising and marketing campaigns there are. And they enormously reliant on TV. Almost all of them use TV. So we really need to think emotionally. Now, the truth of it is, though, as I said earlier, if we're trying to drive short-term effects, it is information that does that. So these rational campaigns can be very good at driving short-term effects, but they don't drive long-term growth. And this has huge implications for how we should choose media and how we should construct our campaigns. So let me just introduce you to another of my eye test charts, and my apologies for this, particularly those of you at the back. I'm just going to make really a couple of very simple points over this chart. It's a very crude analysis, so let's not get too worried about the exact position of points on this chart, because there are many other factors at play here. But I'm just looking at how strongly media are associated with either short-term activation effects on the vertical axis or brand building effects on my horizontal axis. And what you can immediately see from this chart is there is a negative correlation between those 2 axes. So media that are associated with powerful short-term effects do not tend to be associated with powerful brand building effects, and vice versa. And that is because these tend to be rational information media. They are the media that are very good at conveying information. The most important of those, the most powerful of those, is in fact what we would call direct response TV. It's a different way of using TV. It's using facts to nudge us to behave. You know what direct response advertising is like. It's not emotional. It's facts and information. Hugely powerful. And there are others. A lot of the new digital tools are in there, paid search as well. So they're the great ones for driving short-term effects. But the ones that are very good at driving long-term effects are emotive audio-visual media. We need vision and sound working together, and often music is a really important part of the emotional response we generate. And by and large, we can only really do that with audio-visual media. And again, you will see TV features, brand TV features really strongly in that. So almost uniquely, TV can do the 2 jobs. Brand building, used as an emotional medium, as we've seen, and direct response TV used as an information medium. And a lot of advertisers in the UK will often use both those kinds of approaches in one break. So they will take an emotional spot earlier on in the break, perhaps a 30-second spot making us feel good about their brand, and then later in the spot they'll put a 10-second promotional message which is designed to make us get up off our backsides and go and buy their brand. It's a very powerful combination. A lot of people use it. Unilever use it a lot. Just in case any of you aren't convinced of the power of emotions, I'm just going to show you another case study, which is a lovely, almost scientific experiment into the power of emotion. So I love this one. Aldi is a German grocery retailer, which had been in the UK for many years. They're a discount retailer. Their big proposition to the consumer comes from their own brand, Aldi brand. And they have always had the same strategy, which they call the like brands approach. So what they say to consumers is that people like their own label brand just as much as the brand leader in any category. But you know what? It's a lot cheaper, enormously cheaper. It's a simple, rational message. It's a very German message. But what they found when the global financial crisis kicked in 2008, this company should have been doing really well. In fact, they weren't growing, they were flatlining. And their research taught them after a while that the problem was that people simply didn't believe their message. They said, how can it be that cheap and just as good? How can that possibly be true? So they didn't change their strategy in the ad I'm about to show you. All they did was make the message more enjoyable, more emotional. They had some fun with the message. And I draw the analogy with interview theory. I was taught many years ago, and lots of scientific experiments back this up, that if you want to land a job in an interview, the most important thing to do is to make the interviewer like you. If the interviewer likes you, he believes all the good stuff about you. He thinks you are more intelligent than you really are. Believe me, it's the only way I ever landed a job in my entire career. So this is emotional priming at work. If we like a brand, we believe all the good stuff. I'll show you an ad from Aldi. It's a very simple, they made lots of these ads. It's a very simple little joke. It's the same message, but we now just enjoy it. And the effect this has had on the trajectory of this brand in the UK is truly astonishing. But first of all, let's just look at some of those brand metrics that had refused to move for many years. The quality perceptions of the brand, the perceptions of savings to be had, the intention to purchase there, and the overall impression of the store. All of these metrics leapt forward. And you know, brand metrics don't move fast, and they don't move far in general. These are big shifts. That is emotional priming at work. Never happened before. But there's another lovely lesson from this case study, which is about timescales of effect. Because this is the sales curve following the introduction of that new campaign. And you can see how in the year before they'd been kind of pretty much flatlining, no real growth, and they should have been growing. The campaign started, as you can see on the left-hand side. There was an immediate short-term effect, no doubt about it, despite the fact there was a seasonal thing there. There is no doubt that it had a short-term effect, as all good advertising should do. About a quarter of the return on investment effectively came through within the first few weeks of the campaign. But then look how it kind of didn't really generate much momentum for quite a while after that. And if you had been a tough finance director at Aldi, you might have concluded that this wasn't going to pay back. It was borderline. But look what happened about 6 months into the campaign. The emotional momentum starts building, the priming effect kicks in. We started to like Aldi, and people in their millions started shopping at Aldi. And it has completely changed the retail dynamics in the UK. These guys are now terrifying the major players and eating their lunch, believe me. Okay, on to my third big truth, which again we hear so much about. We're told that tight targeting is where the smart money is. Mark Zuckerberg told us a lot about this when he launched Facebook, and his company has been very powerful in trying to persuade marketers to use big data to tightly target. So let's just test drive the wisdom of tight targeting in two different ways. And in each of these ways, we're going to be comparing the effectiveness of very tightly targeted campaigns with very broadly targeted campaigns and looking at patterns of effectiveness. First up, I'm going to compare tightly targeted campaigns in the sense of campaigns targeted at existing customers of our brand, very tightly targeted, versus slightly more broadly targeted campaigns that aim for new customers in our category, versus the most broadly targeted campaigns that say, to hell with that targeting, we're just going for everyone in the category. Now, those of you who follow the Ehrenberg Bass Institute's work, and Byron Sharp in particular, will know that he has been saying for years that if we want to drive growth, we have to target broadly. And my data entirely agrees with him. But let's look first at what happens with short-term effects, and this is the problem. If we measure success by short-term metrics, activation effects, we see that tightly targeted campaigns appear to be more effective, and they do in the short term. If I already know your brand, and I already like it because I've already bought it, you can probably nudge me to buy it again, probably bringing forward sales I would have made anyway. But you can do that. It does work in the short term as an activation tool. But that's all it does. If you look at long-term effectiveness, and this is annualized market share growth measured over longer periods of time, you can see the problem. The moment we stop reaching out to new consumers and bringing them into our brand, we start to lose growth, long-term growth. Byron Sharp is right, absolutely right, no doubt about it. Say the people from Facebook, but that's a very old-fashioned view about tight targeting. That's not how we do it anymore. What we now do is we use people's digital trail to identify that they are about to make a purchase in the category, and then and only then we serve our advertising message to them. And surely that's got to be awesomely efficient. No waste at all. Let's test drive it. Let's test drive it. Because about a quarter of the campaigns coming into this database in recent years have done precisely that. They've used big data to drive a real-time campaign where you serve advertising messages to people according to their digital trail. And we find the same thing. So we find that this has an enormous impact on short-term activation effects. Big data, without doubt, is a great tool for driving short-term effects used in this way. You know what's coming. I'm a very predictable presenter. This is the impact on long-term growth. The moment we stop reaching out to new consumers and start tightly targeting at people at the last moment, we stop priming people to want to choose our brand. We fight for that last second or microsecond of their attention, and it weakens long-term growth. So we have to do these things in balance. We have to be very careful about these shiny, exciting new tools because they are almost always based around short-term effects. Fortunately, none of us have to make this mistake again because our friends at Procter & Gamble have done this experiment for us and made this mistake. So this refers to their 2014 Facebook experiment when they pulled many millions of dollars out of particularly TV brand building advertising in the US and put it into a tightly targeted one-to-one Facebook-driven campaign. And as many of you will know, it was a commercial disaster for them. In some instances, they lost 8 share points for some of their brands. And their CMO, Mark Pritchard, has been very open about this mistake and very helpfully said the following to the Wall Street Journal. We targeted too much and we went too narrow. He went on to say, the bigger your brand, the more you need broad reach and less targeted media. So let's be clear about this. We need broad reach media, and we need broad reach in two senses. Reach in the normal sense, which means the coverage of all consumers. So we need a medium that can reach out to as many consumers as possible. But we also need a medium that consumers spend a lot of time with, because that shows they are emotionally engaged in that medium, but also it means we can serve our message to them on a number of occasions, and we can therefore scale our advertising. So we need media that achieve both those goals. So let's just look. This is UK data, but the data I'm about to show you, I've seen the equivalents in the US, in Canada, and in Australia, and they're very, very similar pictures. This is the kind of pattern you see in economies that have large digital advertising marketplaces. So what we find is that We want to be in the top right-hand corner of this chart. That is where real media power lies for an advertiser. Big reach and many hours a day spent with it. And broadcast TV is by an enormous margin the most powerful channel there is there. Social networking, a long way behind all of that. I'll come back and talk about social networking in a minute. Huge excitement around the world about Netflix. You know, everyone watches Netflix. Nobody watches free-to-air TV. It's complete bubble thinking. This is the Netflix box. Outside of highly paid media executives, very few real people in the UK or anywhere in the world have the money to watch that kind of stuff. So let's be clear about it. This is fact. This is a huge study, single-source study done by the IPA called Touchpoints. It is the truth. Single currency, single study. The digital guys hate it because it points out the truth about media. So are things changing dramatically and radically? So this is 2016 data. Let's look how things changed in 2017. You see that bit of a move there? We replay it just to see. Go. So yes, there are some movements. But in fact, a lot of the movements of broadcast TV are shifts from linear to multi-device viewing and time shifting, which aren't always fully captured in this data. In fact, broadcast TV is incredibly stable in the UK, as it is in so many markets around the world. And with millennials, there are some differences. Social networking is more important, TV slightly less important, but that's always been the case. But let's just come back to online and social media. You'll hear it often said that money should follow the time spent online. But that's a dangerous belief, because we have to remember how people spend their time online. Same data source. And what this tells us, and this is particularly true of social media, is that about 2/3 of the time people spend online is spent in some form of messaging. Some form of messaging. And what we know from a lot of research and the enormous wave of ad blockers that have been installed on machines around the world is that people really hate commercial intrusion into their messaging space. They really hate it. So the real time that's available to advertisers is the third on the right-hand side of that chart. Professor Mark Ritson has written a lot about social media, most of it too rude to share with you here and now. I'm a polite person. This is one of his more polite quotes. He's a very funny man. I urge you to follow Mark Ritson's writing. It's worth reading. What he said, he's an Australian academic, he said, it's called social media for a reason. Most Australians, most people, use it to connect with people, not with companies. And that is really true. That's why people like it. They don't want endless commercial messages served to them. So let me give you an example. This is my final ad break of the definitive broad reach campaign in the UK. This is for a department store called John Lewis. And 10 years ago, everyone was saying Amazon will kill this business, the department store. So old-fashioned. Well, Amazon are not killing this business. This business is doing extremely well. And in large part, it's because of their commitment to emotional brand building and, in particular, to the incredibly powerful use of TV. So in the run-up to Christmas every year, they spend about £4 million over 2 months, in November and December, when they seek to make John Lewis the definitive place to do your Christmas shopping. And their insight is very simple, that the most powerful gifts are the ones that have an emotional impact on the recipients. And that's what they dramatize in their ads. Each ad each year is very different. And we look forward to it in the UK. We're very sad. We look forward to this campaign. It's like the next blockbuster Hollywood movie. Their latest campaign just broke in the UK about a week or two ago, and there was huge excitement in the media about it. The one I'm about to show you was from their 2015-2016 Christmas. I'll talk about the effectiveness of it afterwards, but let me just play you the ad. It's about 2 minutes long. You'll be needing your handkerchiefs because you'll be crying by the end of it. So it's about the loneliness of old age. Now, this is not about selling telescopes. They do sell telescopes, but this is not about selling telescopes. This is about that insight, that great presence, have an emotional effect on people. And this is the store that understands that. So it's been phenomenally successful. It doesn't just drive their business at Christmas, it drives it year round. This is the only brand building they do. They trade off it for the rest of the year, they activate for the rest of the year. They spend 60% of their budget in the run-up to Christmas on brand building. They're absolutely model 60-40 business. I could show you the online sales curve. It's exactly the same as the offline. This is their physical sales in the department store, but the online success is the same. It's been an astonishing success story. Over the 6-year period, it's taken them from about a 22 share to almost 30 share in the marketplace. They are not being killed by Amazon. Everyone in the UK is trying to copy these guys and learn from their success. Now, TV has been hugely important to this. I just want to throw some more numbers at you. Forgive me, I'm not going through all these numbers. Don't worry, this is not a Specsavers eye test. Ignore most numbers. I'm just going to draw your attention to these two numbers here. So these are the online views and the TV views. Now, bear in mind, this is one of the most eagerly anticipated and shared and talked about campaigns in the UK, bar none. It is an enormous viral success. It's extremely rare for any online video to achieve 80 million views over this period. 80 million views in a population with 40 million adults is an astonishing achievement for online video. It's big. But look at the number of TV views. 2.4 billion. That's what you get with TV that you can't get with frigging online video. You cannot do it. It doesn't scale. You have to be putting your money onto TV. And it's not changed, even in the UK, where we have this vast sales machine for online video. It hasn't altered the fundamentals of how to drive growth. Scalability is really, really important. So what we find here is that there is no other medium still now in 2017 in the UK or anywhere in these developed economies that constitutes this database that can rival the ability of brand TV to drive market share growth. Campaigns that don't use TV achieve less than half the kind of market share growth that those that do use TV. TV sponsorship is a useful tool and starts to close that. And I've put direct response TV on there just to repeat my point of earlier. Direct response TV is all about the short-term sales piece, does that very well, but inevitably it can't drive long-term sales as powerfully as brand-building TV. Ah, say the guys who do, yeah, but TV must be getting less effective, mustn't it? Must be. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. What we're finding is TV, and indeed many other traditional media, this is true of outdoors, print, news media, radio, they are all getting more effective, not less, because the potential for synergies with digital are enormous. The thing about a great TV commercial is that your response mechanism is sitting in your pocket now. They can work so much more powerfully. So we're finding this, that TV is actually getting very significantly stronger for those that choose to still use it and haven't been seduced by the digital sales machine into cutting their TV budget. Now, one of the reasons why online video is actually quite helpful here is that if you compare campaigns that use TV on its own with TVs that also team it with online video, like John Lewis did. John Lewis pre-released that commercial online, a bit like the way Hollywood pre-released some of their movies, to build the excitement. And they use online video very well. You get a bigger multiplier out of it. So it's actually a powerful help. But let's just look at these two. This is what online video on its own can achieve. Useful, but no comparison to what TV on its own can achieve, because it just simply isn't scalable. So the ratio of those two, this one and that one, is about 2.4. So let's focus on that ratio in my next chart. So this is the power of TV, TV's performance versus online video from this data, the IPA data measured through share growth, 2.4. I just want to compare it with two other really important pieces of research that have come out in the last 6 months that have an astonishing resonance with this. This study was done by Australian academic Karen Nelson Field, and I urge you all to read her work. Dare I say, Google her work and read it. So this is Australian data, and what she has looked at, it's a very clever study. She uses the same creative. She interrupts people's ad feeds. She serves the same creative onto their TV screen as she serves onto their Facebook feed, as she serves onto their YouTube viewing. And she can then measure the impact that has on short-term sales. And this is what she finds, that TV has a 2.6-time multiplier in terms of effectiveness. And there are lots of really interesting reasons why that is the case, to do with the amount of the commercial we see and its size on screen. But even her study, she hasn't even taken account about whether the sound is turned on or off. So that will make an even bigger impression. So I would argue this is an underestimate. But there you go, 2.4, 2.6. And this is the latest study published just last week in the UK by two highly respected econometric modelers, Ebiquity, who were looking at short-term effects, and Gain Theory, that were looking at long-term effects of different media on return on investment. And what did they find? They found that TV was 2.4 times as effective as online video. So don't believe me, don't believe Karen Nelson Field, don't believe Ebiquity and Gain Theory if you don't want to, but you'll be a fool if you don't, because this is a really consistent body of evidence. And this is not what you will hear from the digital sales guys. Okay, it's time I finish, so I will quickly pull to an end. Video on demand is also positively influencing the power of TV, because we can serve our advertising messages more at the time of the choosing of the consumer, when they are more amenable to advertising messages. So video on demand is again proving a useful tool. And now launched in the UK very, very recently, we have addressable TV, and that's going to make an even bigger impact, I think, on our ability to extract value from TV, because we can play many of the same games that the digital boys can achieve, short and long term, and make them work together. So let me end with one final piece of nonsense that we need to nail. A lot of people have said in recent years that what we spend on paid media is no longer important. The great thing about digital is we can use viral effects and we can earn our exposure. We don't have to put dollars into the marketplace anymore. I don't know where they think they're getting that from. I mean, this is complete nonsense. What we find here is that those campaigns that try and do that are dramatically less effective than those that put paid media into the marketplace. And the more we put money into the marketplace, the bigger the effects. So what we are finding, and this is driven by the increasing effectiveness of paid media, as I've shown you, is that budget, measured as share of voice, SOV in my next chart, is getting more important, not less. It's getting more important that we defend our budgets and that we invest, particularly in brand building, not less important. For the statisticians amongst you, these are the R-squared scores. That measures the proportion of market share growth explained only by budget, by share of voice alone. There are many other factors that influence growth, creativity being the most important one of them. I haven't talked about creativity today. But what this shows us is that budget has become twice as important to growth as it used to be in the early part, in the Web 1.0 period versus the Web 2.0 period. So it really matters. We still need to invest in brand building. We still need to invest in the primary brand building kinds of messages and the primary brand building kinds of media, TV being the most important one. Okay, it's time I shut up. I'm just going to end with a few conclusions. I hope I've convinced you not to make the mistake we are making elsewhere in the world and thinking short-termism is cool. Short-termism is immensely damaging of effectiveness. We need to remember that we have to do both in balance. We have to build long-term growth through brand building as well as doing short-term activation. And the 60-40 rule is a good place to start as a way of balancing it. Always remember that TV reigns supreme. It still reigns supreme in the UK and in all the other markets that we study. for long-term effectiveness, but it can also be an immensely powerful short-term activation medium. And with the help of addressable TV, that's only going to get even bigger and better. So TV is a fantastic medium all round. And the unique power of TV derives essentially from its ability to stir emotions. It's a great emotional medium, as you've seen, but also its ability to drive that fame response, to get everyone talking about it. It's the simultaneous exposure you can get to your advertising message, which John Lewis used so powerfully in their campaign. Everyone is talking about that campaign when it breaks, and they carry on talking afterwards. Only TV can do that. It's a fantastic strength. But also TV's strength derives from its enormous reach and the scalability that we have with TV. We can drive billions of exposures, not just millions, and that's critical to long-term success, as Ehrenberg Bass will teach you. Narrow targeting is a very seductive argument. You will hear this many times. It sounds sensible that it ought to be more effective, but it just isn't. We have to broad target to bring consumers into the brand to drive long-term growth. And then finally, paid media are vital to success, and share of voice is actually getting more important, not less. So let's really challenge, as you hear more and more from the digital sales machine, just challenge, challenge, challenge. We didn't do it enough in the UK, and we've been sold a lot of very dodgy thinking, and it, as I've shown you, destroyed an enormous amount of effectiveness. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good evening.